Welcome to our chit chat.
Well, we're going to have kind of just a little bit of a self-moderated conversation about kind of our startup journeys and kind of corporate journeys. Perhaps we start with the question that was posed to us. Who is our customer? Who is our user? And how do those align?
Ladies first.
Oh, sure. All right. So I founded Saavy Cooperative, and for those of you who aren't familiar, Saavy is a marketplace for patient insights and user experience research. And therefore, who we think of as what we consider our client and who pays us are things like pharma companies, tech companies, other vendors, anybody sort of more in the client industry type space, I guess academia as well. But then who we think about really as kind of our users and who we really design for are patients, so that we can think about how to engage patients and caregivers in the co-design process for our clients. So that's what we have, sort of a two-sided marketplace that we need to be able to balance those dynamics as well.
And from the YPrime side, as many of you know, our clients, almost exclusively pharma companies, also clinical research organizations as well. And like many entrepreneurs, I had the opportunity to work on the client side before starting YPrime, which I think was a great help in really understanding the plight of the client, which is different in our case from typically the end user, so it makes it a little more complex.
Yeah, and for me, we have a range of different products that actually have different customers, different users. I'll talk about this one since it's all out in the audience. This product is for clinical trials, and so our customer, our sponsors, typically folks that run clinical operations, but our end user, well, are twofold. Our end user are families, caregivers, and their children, and also sites, because sites need to go use these and explain procedures at a site level.
Do those make noise? Is that what I've heard throughout?
If they do, it's phenomenal. But no, they have an app that goes with that. If your bear is making noise, please come tell me. It's a new feature.
User error. Is it a feature or a bug?
Could be a new innovation.
Well, I think sometimes, at least a question that I'm asked a lot, and I'm sure you both are as well, is kind of how did you get started? But I kind of want to go one step deeper, and I'm a little bit curious, like, what was your first step? What was kind of the first move that you took, or even what got you thinking about starting a business?
Well, mine was out of just seeing the problem. And so prior to starting Saavy, first of all, I do identify as a patient. I have lots of autoimmune conditions. I had a brain tumor up here, so lots of things. And so I was very ingrained in sort of the patient experience, and that's what led me into healthcare in the first place. And I was a human factors engineer and human-centered designer. I was an academic studying patient-centered outcomes. I was an FDA advisor. And functionally, I just heard all of my colleagues talking about patients, but not talking with them. And they were guessing, and like well-meaning people. Great people, wanted to do right, but they just didn't have the information. So they'd say hey Jen, you're a patient. Will you weigh in on this committee or that project? And honestly, I do remember there was one distinct week when I was asked 5 times to join whatever projects. And I was this is a real diversity issue. I'm white with a PhD, live in New York City, have private health insurance. Let's go talk to some other people. It was an access issue too. I was the low-hanging fruit because they were the patient that they knew. So that was sort of organically then me going oh, let's go talk to some other patients and reaching out. And so that's when I had the aha moment of, oh, all these patients and caregivers want to provide feedback. They just didn't have a mechanism to do it. And the reason why I then chose to even start, which, I say, if I had known I was going to start a business, I would not have done a PhD. That was horrible. So I would have skipped that. But really seeing that, this is an opportunity to connect the two sides, but I didn't know that if everybody would be to do so in a way that was equitably valuing the patients. And so I felt sort of called to do it, to make sure that we could do it in a way that's fairly serving the patients and protecting their rights first and foremost. And what I mean is making sure they're fairly compensated, being transparent with how their data is going to be used, negotiating those contracts on behalf of the patients to the clients, and sort of helping to liaise there. And that was really sort of the call to do it, was, just got to make sure that we're protecting the people I care most about.
Mine might be a little more shallow than that, but it was essentially...
Honesty is what we want up here.
Essentially, I didn't like following rules. And I had worked at many different companies, and I didn't necessarily like how a lot of the companies were structured and how they managed. And I think Jamie and I say this a lot of times to people. we wanted to create a place where we like to work, and that didn't necessarily mean following all the same rules you see what you would call typical corporate America. And so it was somewhat selfish that I wasn't inspired to go get a PhD or go through the normal channels of climbing the ranks to be an executive. But I don't know, as a kid, I always pictured myself in this role, and I still don't know how I accomplished it, but it was self-serving because I really wanted to work somewhere that I really liked working.
How'd you get started?
Yeah, well, I mean, I really relate to the challenge with authority to this day. I guess it's a lifelong challenge.
Same here.
Yeah. So for me, I really never intended to start a company. I kind of stumbled into it one step at a time. I helped start a nonprofit called Design for America, which is all about using design thinking, the concept that we just heard about earlier, to solve problems with social impact. And the very first project was with people with diabetes. And so we just observed as we went in and we actually did patient interviews, right? We saw that kids were injecting their stuffed animals. And me, I was studying engineering. I love making things. I just wanted to make a bear with diabetes that embodied what those kids were already doing. And so I was driven by the process of continuing to make these prototypes. And so made one, tested it with a child. They were terrified by it because it had the eyes from a Furby and it was like a scary looking bear. But they were so excited to see it. They were excited. They were waiting at the door. Their face was pressed up against the glass, right? Which is the concept of a teddy bear that had the same condition as them. And so just these little baby steps. Got a grant, built another prototype, built another prototype. Somebody recommended we apply to a business accelerator. And at that point, I was just like, okay, a little more money to build a few more prototypes. And lo and behold, I left school in my senior year and ended up in Providence, Rhode Island. And it's 11 years later, and it feels like it was just yesterday.
I see that story a lot with successful business entrepreneurs. Now, I think we were talking earlier, when you started, did you see yourself ending up where you are today?
I mean, for me, absolutely not. I mean, we definitely had a really lofty mission. Like, we started with wanting to get a bear to every child with type 1 diabetes, which happened 2 years ago, which is awesome. Oh, yeah. Never thought that would happen. But also now we're in an entirely different business. We are essentially an adherence platform. We sell to pharmaceutical companies. I never imagined that that's a place we would step into. We're all the places along the way. The only reason we exist is because of an incredible partnership with Aflac, where we created a marketing campaign that hit their ESG goals. So, right, if this thing ESG hadn't come around and shareholders and index funds weren't picking up on this, the type of social impact work that we were doing would have never been able to float through the marathon to get to a place where we have a real value proposition that's delivering ROI besides the good feelings and the comfort and the joy and everything that we do. But I would have never imagined that. I don't know, Jen, if you relate to that at all.
Yeah, you're making me think of some things. Did I think I was going to start a business? Did I think I would be here? I mean, I still am like in awe when I look at sort of our logo slide or whatnot, because we work with all the pharma companies, the big tech companies, the Amazons, everyone, and I'm like, how did I do this? Like, right? And obviously it's not just me. And so it's thinking about bringing a team along and doing all of that too. But you just talked about like your Aflac moment. Maybe I'll use that as now a new term. But thinking about that, like obviously the whole healthcare industry has been talking about being patient-centered for how long, right? And I've been doing this long enough that everyone says that and everyone's website said that and that was cool and all. And then it's like, okay, it's enough time to just say that, now start doing things. And there was some action happening, but I would say that it's really in the past several years or few years from the pandemic and really associated with the civil unrest that happened that we started to see people investing more in this. And I hear all the time people say, oh, we're all patients, which I personally am not on board with framing it that way, because I think that can be dismissive of people who have unique experiences that we need to hear from. And so therefore, if you say, oh, well, we're all patients. Well, you can't say we're all black and brown patients. And so we really started to see companies investing and doing the work to make sure we're including historically excluded communities in the co-design of these different solutions. So that was the moment that I saw people starting to literally put their money where their mouth was to do patient engagement. That's my Aflac moment.
I think ours was we looked around and we had hired a number of really impressive people, and we said, oh my goodness, we've got a company going here. We need to take care of this. We need to nurture it. We have an opportunity that doesn't land on many people's doorsteps. And, do you think you make your own luck, or do you think luck happens in business? It's so interesting when you look back of all the lucky scenarios, all the people that you were able to work with. You got to be there. You got to be working. You got to get up every day thinking about how you're going to make your business or the world a better place, and it kind of it can fall your way. But I certainly don't think we started out looking to build something like this in a community and a global scale.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fascinating, and that's actually one of my favorite questions that Guy Raz, right, asks everybody that comes in how I built this, is kind of like about luck, right, this concept. And I think you're so right, just showing up, understanding this isn't a glamorous thing, you don't go into entrepreneurship for the glamour of it all. Like, you're rolled up, I think of Mike Rowe's Dirty Jobs, right? Like, you're inside of a concrete mixer, chipping out the dirty concrete and doing what has to be done. But the more you show up, the more you're in situations where you can have that luck, where you can have your Aflac moment, or, whatever it might be, that can really get you going.
And I think to build on that, for me, if I think about how we got here, a lot of it is, kind people and connections. And I think that we've all benefited from that. And that's what, like, when I go and talk to entrepreneurs or other students or whomever it might be, it's like, please, like, go to those networking events. Like, you never know. And I know that, you've benefited from some connections, and you. And so therefore, like, thinking about that, and that part of the luck is just like showing up to be part of your community, and how can you help each other. Nothing gives me greater joy than actually just like, you two should talk, go, I don't need to be part of this, but like, go do something, build something great. And so I think that like that really helps galvanize things, are like good people that believe in what you're doing and want to help you. So don't be a jerk.
Yeah, you absolutely have to pay it forward, and you have to get out of your comfort zone. The amount of times in the early days where somebody had to go to a conference, we didn't have a large marketing budget. It was usually me, almost exclusively, and you'd walk into a conference with anywhere from 100 to 30,000 people. And in the early days, I didn't really know if I would know anybody, and that was pretty. You might think I'm an extrovert, but I think I'm an introverted extrovert, or whatever they call it. But the next time you went to the conference, you knew 5 people, and the next time you went to an event, you knew 10, and it compounds, and eventually, 18 years later, you walk to a conference and Jamie makes fun of me because everybody's coming over to say, hey. Well, that didn't happen overnight.
You're easy to spot.
I am. I do have that going for me.
Yeah, but I mean, it so resonated with me, the talk earlier, about the climber and the Sherpa, and one of the most powerful things you can do as a climber, right, is to reach back behind you and pull the next person up. And I'll just attest that, I don't know if you remember this, but the first time I went to Scope last year, we're new to the clinical trial industry, you saw me sitting down alone, and you got me up and you said, hey, Aaron, like, let's go for a walk. And you shared that same insight, that every year you come, it feels a little bit less lonely, and kind of took me under your wing for that conference. And that, so much gratitude. And so for everybody in the audience, like, as a takeaway, making those connections, reaching back, seeing somebody that's new, bringing them into the industry, that is what really changes the game.
I did that?
That doesn't sound like you.
No, not at all.
That's not very shallow. Right? It's very thoughtful. Clearly, you must be mistaken. The other one I love asking is, any things you would do differently? I know there's thousands of things I probably would do differently.
I mean, there's so many things, but I don't know. I mean, no regrets, right? Live in the moment. But I think kind of continuing on sort of the people in the community is like, I don't want to say take more advantage of that in a, negative way, but I have a really hard time asking for help. And so that's my thing is, yes, I have this great network. Yeah, I see them at conferences all the time. They do great intros, and I appreciate that. But then I'm always like, oh, I don't want to bother them. I don't want to ask them. And like thinking then about like the actual like the ask of it. Are you asking as a friend? Like here, I built a business around like equitably valuing people, so I get hung up on that. If like I ask them to do this, what does that mean? I don't expect everybody to do it out of the goodness of their heart, although they probably would, but I get hung up on that. So I think that's what I would do differently, is tell myself to like lean into those great people that I know want to help, and I get too caught up in my own head about asking.
I think that's great advice for all of us. I mean, that's part of the theme of bringing this group together, is you have a new extended network that you can ask help from.
Yeah, and I'll just say that really resonates with me on a deep level, the power of asking for help, and also like the power of building a board of directors who you feel comfortable asking help, right? And not seeing the challenges or what you perceive as the failures you're going through as something to hide, but something to say like, oh, I really need help working on this. So that's just like, amen, absolutely. And then there's so many things that I think would have, hindsight is 20/20, but I'll share like one really specific example, because I know we talked about, there was prototyping that was talked of earlier, this concept of rapid prototyping, getting out of the office, testing something as quickly as possible. And I'm a real product person, like I love making things. So this is like a really tangible one for me. Like our very first bear, the one I just referenced that we built, it was a 10-week process. I was still a student. We took independent studies. I learned how to solder circuit boards and lay out electronics, learned how to program. And we built this teddy bear that spoke. It had a blood sugar. You could feed it foods, right? And it took us 10 weeks to go out and test this idea. What did we learn from that? Well, we just saw the child's excitement. Now, I think hindsight, well, what would have been a better way to do that? I always think about what can you do in 5 minutes, and I always wish that we took a walkie-talkie and cut open the back of a stuffed animal and stuck the walkie-talkie in the stuffed animal, and somebody just waited outside the window and was like, hi, it's a pleasure to meet you, right? Like, and kind of had this, Wizard of Oz interaction. And so I always think of how much time we spent trying to prove that ideas were good ideas, that we could have done, like, in retrospect, like this, if we were focused more on the question we were asking and less on maybe the joy of making, or like the actual act of making something that we wanted to look like our end product.
Sorry to interrupt, Jen. How do you three feel about taking a couple of questions from the audience?
Love to.
Let's do it.
All right.
You just showed up there. Caught me off guard.
Really stealthy. A second career.
Do we have any questions for our panel from the audience? Make Jeff run. There you go.
A question for Jen. How does Saavy gather the patient insights? How do you gather that data and populate that data?
Great question. So I'll tell you quickly, the way that we reach patients is more of a peer-to-peer outreach model. So when our clients come to us, they give us very specific criteria, just like you would for like a clinical trial. Hey, here's exactly who we're looking for. We turn to our community and we say, here's who we're looking for, find them. And then they reach out in culturally sensitive ways to their own communities. So we can really leverage the networks that already exist. And then we pull them in, and that could be for projects like interviews, focus groups, surveys, user testing, actually having 3D printed devices and have them wear an adhesive and see if it works, and will they wear it and use it. So it can be anything, but really we kind of have the access to the patients and caregivers, and then just help work with our clients in that regard to answer the questions they have.
Great. Get your steps in, Jeff.
Woo!
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Great, good. So I'm a big fan of each of you. I really appreciate it. And coming from an entrepreneur, I wanted to ask you, I mean, you spend all of this time, 10 weeks, teddy bears, all of this, getting to an objective. You get to a point, you get to the top of the mountain. What do you do after that?
I mean, I remember as a kid hiking in the Teton National Park, and I related it to business because I would always sprint ahead of my family because I wanted to be the first to the top. And if you've ever hiked out west in the Rockies, you get to a peak which you think is the top, and you look, and there's another one. And you're like, okay, it's just one more. And it always came back to me. It's like, this feels like hiking back when I was a kid. There is no top. It is never ending. And those of you who've worked in big companies know this, that growth is the only reason these companies keep going forward, is just growing. And so you get there, you celebrate, and then you keep going.
There's always new challenges. You learn new things, and even as, CEOs, like you end up learning, oh, now this is my job. Oh, now this is my job. Like, now I'm at the place, like, a lot of feelings, like, that's your job, is like, working with a team and dealing with that, and I didn't know that. So, like, there's always something more to learn. It's not just the product. Like, there's a lot more to running a business.
But I understand what you're saying, because when you do reach an objective, you're like, okay, I can celebrate a little bit, but I got to re-motivate myself for the next goal and objective.
And I think that's kind of like the curse of being an entrepreneur, is you always see the problems, right? In a good way, right? You see problems to be solved. And as you said, Jen, like we're not running out of problems in the world that we live in. And so once you solve one subset or create something that can, you just see the next ones and then the next and the next.
Sorry to interrupt you, Ian, but the one thing that we were talking about earlier that I think I'd love to hear more from Aaron on is this topic of intrapreneur, and how is that a real word? I heard you use it in a real sentence, but I think it applies to this group and everything we're trying to do. So when you said it, I said, I want to remember to bring that up on stage.
Oh yeah, and thank you for that, because I think in this conversation, about entrepreneurship, we always think about this kind of, I would say, like archetypal entrepreneurial model. Somebody has an idea, builds a prototype, goes and raises millions of dollars from venture capitalists and sells their company, right? And that's like one model of entrepreneurship, and it's a great one, but it's not for everybody. And the entrepreneurial mindset isn't just for people that start companies. And so there is this term, entrepreneurship. I hope it's a real word. I'm saying it on the stage here. And it's about people who are using that mindset within a larger company. Starting innovation initiatives, starting a new product line, taking the same mindset and approach of what are the problems here and how can we fix them, right? Like, how can we break through the barriers of the frameworks in which we think that these systems work and redefine them and change them? And that's entrepreneurship. And so whether you're in a large company, whether you have a desire to start a business, right? It's the mindset that's important, and the approach to problem solving that you take, like design thinking, like all these other different approaches, regardless of kind of where you're sitting. And of course, each one comes with its unique challenges. And entrepreneurship has a whole host of challenges that I personally can't relate to as much, but have talked to so many people, and the challenges are things like bureaucracy, or things like tapping funding, proving ROI for the core business, right? Like, it goes on. And those are equally as difficult to solve as finding your first customer and going through and creating your first prototype and hiring your team, right? They're all parallels.
But I think you can see it happening in action, too, about doing what we talk about with user-centered design.
Oh, yeah.
So, at Saavy, we work with lots of intrapreneurs that are saying, they're coming to us and say, hey, our team is looking to see if we should build a companion app for our therapeutic. And so we want to just talk to a few patients who have this specific disease and see if this is something they'd be interested in. And then they're able to use that and pitch that to their boss to get buy-in, get budget to continue to build it out. So you can be doing that at any stage.
Awesome.
Absolutely.